Hello, everyone. Fantastic. Thank you, Julia. So we are at 10:03. We'll go ahead and get started. So I'd first want to just say welcome to everybody who has joined us for this CASH seminar. My name is Lori Hunter. Deborah Balk, who is here with us, and myself are co-directors of the center, and Landy Sanchez, Catherine Grace, and Sarah Curran are also leads for this effort. And Julia Shipman, who we have here, is our main administrative gal. We couldn't do any of this without her. So thank you, Julia. So the center is an online, a virtual center on these three areas in their intersection: aging, climate, and health. We're funded by the NIA, and we are endeavoring to really enhance interdisciplinary connections around these three topics. We're providing workshops like this one that help folks grapple with how to bring these data together to work towards answers to these really challenging questions. We provide seed grants. Hopefully a call will go out soon, funds for different kind of workshops, research presentations, seminars, and we really want to share information that will help sort of move this area forward. We are definitely targeting, the provision of resources to help this work. So for example, different kinds of trainings and also sample code that would allow people to integrate different data. I really encourage you all to check out our website. We will put that link in the chat. So today we are having the second of our series of seminars. The first was as related to county level data integration, and provided an overview of one of my projects, which is one of 6 demonstration projects that the center is initially using to provide sort of training opportunities. So we've got 6 projects that provide examples of this kind of data integration. Today's seminar will cover 2 other projects, one led by Deborah and the other led by Landy. So I will introduce Dr. Christian Branian, who will be our moderator for today. He also serves on the executive committee of CASH. So Dr. Branian is a climate scientist that serves on the New York City panel on climate change, as well as the board of directors of the Trust for Governors Island. He has served as faculty at the Georgia Institute of Technology, Houston Tillotson University, and Barnard College at Columbia. A recipient of the 2021 AXA Award for Climate Science. His work focuses on climate change impacts and adaptation strategies. So, Christian, thanks so much for working with us today, and I will hand it to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lori. I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Deborah Balk, who co-directs CASH as part of our first presentation team. She's the director of the CUNY Institute for Demographic Research and also professor at Baruch College, as well as the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. We're really pleased to have her because she's an expert on population-climate interaction, and she applies spatial demographic analysis to issues of health, poverty, and vulnerability. She served on key climate and demographic advisory panels, including New York City Panel on Climate Change, along with me, as well as the National Climate Assessment and the U.S. Census Bureau Scientific Advisory Committee, as well as the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Population. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to Dr. Deborah Balk, and she can introduce her team and walk us through their demonstration project results.
Thank you, Christian. And Frank, do you want to start sharing our screen, our slide deck with us? Yeah, I'm as somebody who's worked in the population and climate field for the better part of a couple decades now. It's always exciting to me when we have new projects that bring in people who have thought about climate in their lives, but not in their research. So you bring in research experts in various aspects of demography, for example, and so this project is one such example of that. So our project is called The Impact of Extreme Weather on Hard to Capture Vulnerable Populations, Evidence from Hart Island, New York Public Burial Ground. So let me just briefly introduce our team today. Frank and Selin and I will be giving the the presentation. Frank and Selen are both economists. Frank is a professor at the Marx School of Public and International Affairs and at the CUNY Graduate Center, and the associate director, though, of the CUNY Institute for Demographic Research, currently on sabbatical. And Selen is a doctoral student in economics at the CUNY Graduate Center. And as you can see, we have a really interdisciplinary team. I think Jennifer and Tanya are also in today's call, and Christian, who's moderating, is part of our team as well, and one last colleague, Peter. You can see that we have within CUNY, CUNY is a university of many colleges throughout New York City. And so we bring in experts from across our large university, as well as across, really importantly, across disciplines. We have public health, demography, economics, geography, climate science, quantitative methods. I mean, we have a whole range. We have 2 students as part of our team. It's really a delightful interdisciplinary exercise. And I think, as you'll see, the interdisciplinary nature is necessary. Next, Frank. So let me set up the research questions and our objectives of this piece of research. It fits into a larger project where we look at public burial grounds and many aspects of who is at risk of being buried in a public burial ground. But for this particular paper in this demonstration project, we're examining the relationship between weather extremes and persons buried only in Hart Island, which is the nation's largest and perhaps longest public burial ground. What we do is link daily temperature patterns from 1977 to 2022 to daily deaths that remained unclaimed and were subsequently buried on Hart Island. It's the first of its kind analysis of unclaimed deaths as outcomes, providing a window into mortality among a particularly vulnerable populations. If you're unfamiliar with this kind of population, we'll tell you a little bit about it as we go, and we can answer questions about that at the end. And it also contributes to a large literature on the impact of weather on health or mortality. I want to mention, for those of you who aren't interested in public burial grounds, maybe go back just one more, Frank, just to the last line there, is that this approach that we adopt here is broadly applicable to the study of impacts of temperature extremes with other place-based administrative data or vital events data. So that's a much larger area of research but also we like this study for its ability to help identify aspects of vulnerability that may be harder to capture as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank, and then he will turn it over to Selen, and she will turn it over to Christian.
Thank you, Deborah. Nice to see everybody. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about this exciting work that is very much in progress. So here you have an image of Hart Island, what it actually looks like. It's now possible to visit the island, but it used to be sort of remote and hard to access. The idea was that family members and loved ones could possibly visit these mass grave sites that have been going on for more than 100 years. This caught a lot of attention during COVID when there were images of mass burials in process on social media. And so that's where this interest that we have started, and we have several related projects looking at COVID specifically. The data that we use today goes back to 1977, which is where really the high quality Hart Island death records are starting. There's data from before, but it seems incomplete. So we're focusing on this period, 1977 to 2022. It takes some time for records to be made available. This is all publicly available data, but the burial process and the recording process is slow, so we didn't go any further but 22 for that reason, because the records may not be complete yet. In general, the records have the exact date of death of the person by day, which is extremely important for this work. As you can already tell from the previous discussion that Deborah set up. We also have additional information, much of which we're not using today. We have first and last name, we have place of death, we have age and sex. Obviously, age and sex we're going to use today, and we have some missing records on sex that we impute using the first name and some algorithm. In general, this work is part of an emergence of larger research looking into unclaimed death. We have a paper in Social Science and Medicine, several of us here, that recently came out, and there's other work that's been done on LA, similar to Hart Island, and also nationwide in some of our own work. Unclaimed deaths is an interesting subset of mortality to look at. People are unclaimed, meaning upon death, meaning that they're not buried in a private burial where family members or loved ones claim them and process the body in the usual fashion that we're used to. So it's possibly a marker of lower socioeconomic status, isolation at death, a marker of a very impoverished kind of status of life at the end of life. And we have research that suggests it's about somewhere 1 to 5% of individuals in the United States end up as an unclaimed death. So it's a sizable number of deaths, of course. And we're looking at it for New York City over an extended period of time to link it to extreme temperature data. As Deborah already mentioned, unclaimed deaths may be similar to other types of administrative data that we are familiar with in health and demographic studies. Here's just a quick introduction to the trends that we're talking about here. On the bottom left, you'll see the total number of Hart Island deaths going back to 1977 in our study period. And in total, we're looking at about 50,000 records. The majority are male, 72%. There was the spike you can see in 2020, which is of course the COVID spike, which we have analyzed separately. So I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it's obviously a pronounced feature of this data. On the right-hand side at the bottom, you see the monthly count, so the total number of unclaimed deaths in our data by months. And because we're looking at temperatures around the entire year, it's an important check on, is there any sort of in the crude data, is there any seasonality? And there is some evidence that in January, we have more deaths that end up on Hart Island, in April as well, and in December as well. On this chart, you'll see the distribution of how many people died per day that are buried on Hart Island. The average is about 2.8, and it ranges widely. We have lots of days where there's 0 death, and we incorporate that in our modeling decision. And we have some days with extremely high deaths, like March 11 in 2020, for example, was the peak at 56 deaths. Of course, that was also the peak of COVID mortality in New York City. We do some analysis by subpopulations. We don't want to break this data too finely, but we did an analysis of patterns under the age of 65, those who died under the age of 65, and those who died at an age 65 and older, and we're doing it by sex as well. There are a lot of interesting decisions about modeling and measurement came into this project, and they're still part of our daily discussion when we meet. And so I learned a lot from Deborah, from Christian, and from Peter about what's available, what options do we have, what does the literature say about these relationships, and how should we specify these models. So that's been one of the exciting features of this research. So on the right-hand side here, you see the temperature, the daily max and minimum air temperature in New York City in the year 2015 for all the days, starting with January 1st all the way to December 31st. And you see, of course, as all of you here know, there's going to be a lot of volatility in that. There's going to be a lot of variation in that. Summers are much hotter, of course, the highs and the lows, and then winter, for example, right? So there's a lot of decisions that we had to make, and you're going to see some of the outcome and some of the decisions that we made for the results that we're showing. Obviously, the specific research questions determine what we are actually looking at in terms of the scope of the work. Research conventions in terms of what models people typically use in this kind of data play a role, but also data availability, both observed and modeled, and also the mechanisms how temperature extremes may be related to mortality, this particular kind of mortality, both established, meaning found in the literature and documented, as well as hypothesized, like what are things that are not as clear already, and how do we want to specify our analysis to maybe shed some light on those that are not as clear yet. You also see, of course, that max and min temperatures are highly correlated, which is an important feature of the data as well. So in terms of a little bit more reflection on the measurement constraints and decisions, so some of the previous literature has looked at extreme temperatures in summers only. We thought that there's no need to focus on the summer specifically. If the results come out interestingly for the summer, they will come and fall that way. But this population of socially, economically isolated individuals that die in the fashion that they remain unclaimed, there may be interesting patterns all year round. So we wanted right from the start an approach that looks not just at summer heat. And of course, as soon as you move away from the summer, then maybe the minimum temperatures become even more important in the modeling decision. So by making the decision that we want to look at the entire year, that also means that we have to think very carefully about the measurement of the seasons that we're looking at and the temperatures that we're using for the particular seasons. So in this work, and Zelen will spell this out a little bit further in a couple of minutes, we use the daily high and the daily low temperatures instead of averages, which others have done in some work. We look at air temperature. The previous chart that I showed was based on air temperature, as well as heat index or related measures that capture humidity. What data set should we use? Well, in this particular project, there were many to choose from, and we had to sort of have discussions about what to pick, how to choose, what to try out. So in the end, we focused on air temperature from NOAA as well as from European sources. I'm going to spell it out a little bit more later on. In terms of the modeling decisions, given that the focus was on year-round analyses, it was particularly important to think about seasonality in this context and interacting temperature effects with the season, like daily temperature. How does it differ potentially in the winter from the summer, and what framework is the appropriate framework to use? And there is actually a variety of statistical frameworks that are suitable for this. Given our background in economics and the social sciences, we had a slight preference going into this, looking at generalized linear models with fixed effects. And the results that we're going to present here today are models that are based on count data regressions using daily death with year and decade fixed effects. These are workhorses in the social and behavioral sciences, but given the nature of the data, which looks at trends, seasonality, and time-ordered data, each observation here is a day and how many deaths occurred on that day. Time series analysis is perfectly appropriate for this kind of setup. And in a pretty extensive sensitivity analysis, we did focus on time series models as well. We looked at moving average models and distributed lag models, following examples in the literature. And Zelen is going to talk a little bit more about the results in a second. So one question that we had to tackle, of course, is how to specify the temporal relationship between the exposure, the temperature, and the outcome, the mortality counts. And there isn't necessarily a clear path forward in terms of how this has been addressed in the literature and how we can copy and follow that. So we had extensive discussions about sort of what is the hypothesized length of the relationship. Is there a accumulation effect? How long should we specify periods? And so we kept it pretty general, and we tried several approaches. We'll show you results on several of them. So the general framework we settled on is a max of daily max and a min of daily min specification, meaning we're taking the daily max, and we're looking over 1, 3, 5, 7, 10-day periods and take the max of the daily maxes, and the same for the minimums, the minimum of the daily lowest temperatures over either a day or multiple day periods. An example of how this actually works computationally in the construction of these independent variables is shown on this slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Zelen.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, so just quickly, as Frank mentioned, we have one-day models where we just link the maximum and minimum temperatures of that day to the death count of that day. Of course, this is something we wanted to consider, but as Frank mentioned, it's also really important to look at the lagged effects of these extreme temperatures. And this min-min-max-max framework that we thought of comes like in this format as demonstrated here. So this is actually from our actual data set from 2015. Let's just focus on 9th of July in 2015. So in that day, day 9, our maximum wet bulb temperature is 95.5. So that's basically what we link to the daily death count we observed that day for our one-day model. But for our 3-day model, we look at that day and also the 2 days leading up to it. So we consider what's the maximum among 95.5, 96.5, and 90.5. And the day before had a higher temperature, so we pick that extreme temperature, and then we link that to the death count of that day. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see that in 3-day max variable, if there was an extreme temperature in the vicinity of that day, that temperature keeps repeating because that has been the maximum in that reference period. So this is kind of in line with our mindset of wanting to get at extreme temperatures and the relationship of extreme temperature and mortality rather than taking averages. Next slide, please. So I want to get into a little bit more detail about what criteria we considered for choosing temperature data, knowing that other researchers working in this area also have to make similar discussions, and just kind of wanted to spell it out. So first of all, our temperature data had to be year-round, as Frank mentioned. So even just that knocks out a lot of data sets that are available out there and are out there that is only covering summer. Another thing we really didn't want to get rid of is the minimums and maximums of each day, as opposed to taking the daily average. Again, in the spirit of wanting to investigate the extreme temperature effects. Our outcome variable is daily, and so we have a lot of variation. We didn't want to lose that, so we wanted to pick a temperature data set that has daily information. Another consideration is whether to pick an observed and model or modeled data set. We actually picked both of them, and I will show you in a second, but we just wanted to see if our results changed from an observed or a modeled data set. And when you think about these two, it kind of directly relates to spatial resolution. Because we're focusing on New York City, we couldn't use a data set that was just too crude, which would be a misrepresentation of what it felt like in New York City that day. So we had to pick data sets that were granular enough so that it was a correct representation of what was experienced in New York City that day. And we also wanted some extra parameters for at the daily level as well as temperature, which is our main focus, but we also wanted to have humidity, precipitation, wind, and we just wanted to use these as controls. Next slide, please. So here we're showing quickly that we both use air and wet bulb temperature. So our air temperature data, as Frank mentioned, comes from NOAA, 3 observation points in New York City. And then our wet bulb temperature is a raster, satellite-based raster data. It's modeled, but as you can see, the cells are quite small, and it's sensible to aggregate these to give a general average for New York City that day. Next slide, please. So NOAA dataset already gave us air temperature, daily minimums and daily maximums. So the only thing we had to do is to average these the observations coming from these 3 stations. I learned from Christian that airports tend to be hotter and Central Park tends to be the coolest in the city. So when you take average of these 3 points observed, like both daily minimums and maximums, it kind of gives a good representation of in between representation of what most of New York felt like. So that's what we did. For the wet bulb temperature, ERA 5, this was an hourly data set. So we took the daily maximums and minimums, so we collapsed it to daily. Because it is raster format, we also had to aggregate it spatially. So the way we chose to do it is to take, again, the maximum observed within the boundaries of New York City and minimum observed in the same fashion to stay away from averages. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, we used negative binomial regression models on our daily death count outcome. Our independent variables of interest are season and maximum temperature interactions and season and minimum temperature interactions. We control for total precipitation. We know that deaths unfortunately spike in holidays, so we wanted to include holiday indicators. We are covering a really long time for 4+ decades. So we wanted to include year and decade fixed effects to take out the effects of other time trends, other things that were changing in New York City so that they don't contaminate our results. Next slide, please. So our main finding, the punchline of this project is that summer maximum temperatures in summer are very strongly associated with unclaimed daily deaths. So here we're showing the air temperature results from our 7-day models, and we find that 1 Fahrenheit increase in the maximum temperature in summer is associated with 1.2% increase in deaths. We find very similar results when we look at ERA 5 wet bulb in 7-day. 3-day results in both variables are also similar. 1-day estimates are slightly weaker, but still statistically significant. And everything else is either very weak, or even if it's not, it's less consistent across these different models and variables. So we find them as suggestive. Next slide, please. I know we're a little bit over time, but just to tell you that we ran a lot of robustness checks. We used different measures. We used different definition of seasons. We used different study periods, different subpopulations, monthly instead of seasonal. Whatever we did, we found that our results were pretty robust. So our takeaway is that at least in our location and period, these decisions on what measures to use, how to model, don't really matter. Our results remain the same. So with that, I want to turn it over to Christian.
Yeah, thank you so much. On this slide, I just want to show you some work that we did in 2021 where we integrated satellite data with ground-based measurements. We were able to map the distribution of heat in northern Manhattan. And we're going to incorporate some of this into this research that was presented today. Since we're running short on time, I want to shift and introduce the next team. But this gives you a sense of where we want to go with this work. We want to integrate satellite data with ground-based measurements so that we can better represent the microclimate. So thank you so much, Dr. Balk and everyone else from your team. I'm super excited to introduce Dr. Landy Sanchez-Pena, who's on the executive committee of CASH. She's a professor at the Center for Demographic, Urban, and Environmental Studies at El Colegio de Mexico, specializing in population dynamics, environmental issues, and social inequality. Her research really focuses on the intersection of climate change and urban household well-being. But she also is addressing gender and generational disparities in her work for unpaid and paid folks in Latin America. And like Dr. Bach, she also serves on several editorial and academic committees. She's joined today by Dr. Emerson Augusto Bautista, who's a professor and researcher as well at El Colegio de Mexico. And he's his research really focused on mortality and health, as well as the spatial analysis of the demographic aspects. Um, Without further ado, I want to hand it over to Dr. Pena and Dr. Batista. Looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Christian. So I'm going to share my our presentation. Just 1 second. Here it is. Okay. So this in our team are also in this presentation collaborate also Marcial Jangali, Mariana Ramos, who are also here. They also are recently graduate students from the Master in Demography. So we are very happy that they joined this project. And there is also participated in the larger project, Cecilia Conde, who is also a professor at the UNAM, the National University in Mexico. She is a climatologist. This is our general project, Heat, Disability, and Care for All the Adults in Mexico. And you can check a larger description of the demonstration project in the website of CACHE. But in this presentation, what we are going to do is to talk a little bit about what is a general overview of the disability in older adults in Mexico. And then we are going to discuss in a little bit of some detail the decision to use one measure of heat, that is the Universal Thermal Comfort Index, and why do we use it, and what are some of the advantages or limitations of using that type of index. And then we are going to present some preliminary results about what we get in terms of exposure and risk to extreme heat of older adults with disability in our country. And finally, we are going to talk a little bit about the future work that we are doing. So I'm going to give the microphone to Emerson, and then I'm gonna be back on the screen. Emerson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. And can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. Let me talk a little bit about the disability data. I jump this part, and maybe next slide, please. Yes. So yes, this one. Thank you. Let me talk a little bit about the disability data that we use in this project. So the data comes from the 2020 Mexican census, and there are 7 types of disabilities. And this was the first time that Mexico adopted the Washington Group short set to measure disability in the population and housing census. So for all types of disabilities, respondents were asked in your day, how much difficult do you have to, for example, to see? And the response options are not difficult, some difficult, a lot of difficult, and cannot do at all. So the only disability with a dichotomous response, I mean yes or no, is related to mental disability. So therefore we decide not to include it in this study. So next. Before to discuss the last talk, let me present the age pyramids by the type of disability. Yes, this one. Thank you. And except for, so we can see that except for the communication disability, the first one, we see that the other types of disability have the positive relationship with age. Also, for some of the disability-related census questions, high levels of disability were reported for those under age 5, like, for example, communication, self-care, and remembering. So this is like an issue of interpretation. We responded effectively interpreting questions on abilities to move, self-care, and communicated. So in Mexico, 15.7 of the total population has a disability. We've even included the mental disability. These numbers increase for 16.5%. So let me go back for the previous slide to mention about the last topic. Yes, thank you. Following the recommendations of the Washington Group for International Reporting on the Economist approach, individuals with the disabilities were classified by the degree of the impairment in the body structure as milder, this is in blue, and some difficult, and severe, a lot of difficult and cannot do it all together. Next slide, please. Next. So yes, when you do this aggregation, we find these values for each type of disability. For example, the first one to see, we can see for milder, there are around 9 million people. And when you aggregate a lot of difficult and cannot do at all, the numbers are like 2.5 million people. So, and the next slide, please. And in this slide, we present the result of this disaggregation. So the black pyramids are the same as those presented early. That's it, the total population of people with disabilities. And the colors represent the pyramids only for the severe disabilities. So even so, and except again for the communication, the first one, it is still possible to observe a positive relationship with the age in this structure. So next slide. So, however, we also know that a person may have more than one disability. So it is necessary to account for this to avoid the double counting. So what we observe here is that disabilities tend to accumulate with the aging. We also found that 2.5 million people aged 65 and older have disability, and around 43% of them have more than one. Next, please. Yeah, here we present the pyramids by type of disability only for the people with a single disability. Also, we included the pyramid for the multiple disabilities in this graph. So, and eliminated the communication disability. This is the left side. The right side represents the pyramid with the total population of people, not the total number of disability. And in this case, we observe that among older adults, disability prevalence reached around 25.5%. So, and to conclude this session, the part of the disability data, we present 3 maps, showing the geographic distribution of some disabilities at the municipal level for people aged 65 and older. This first map shows the rate of the population age 65 and older with disability. We observe a higher rate in the municipality located in the southern state of the country. And in the next one, the second map is for self-care disability. So here we see a more homogeneous distribution. And the last one is a map for walking disability. So let me turn over to Landy. Thank you.
Thank you, Emerson. But then why do we want to look at heat extreme and disability in older adults? There are some literature that suggests that prolonged exposure to heat, extreme heat, is associated with faster cognitive decline, particularly among socially vulnerable population and particularly older adults. There is also some studies that show that it exacerbates mental health condition, particularly dementia, and worsen pre-existing disabilities in older adults. There are several papers who also show that older adults' ability to perform instrumental activities of daily living. So this functional ability, or the opposite of that will be disability, functional disability, increases with heat. All of that condition then also increase demands for care during the extreme heat events. Individuals with disability will also face heat increase during weather emergencies as their access to services and healthcare may rapidly deteriorate. So for us, it's important to start looking at the connection between disability and heat extremes, particularly in countries like Mexico, who all year round have regions where heat extreme is present. So we are going to talk a little bit about why we want to use one measure of heat, that is the Universal Thermal Comfort Index. As our previous presentation was talking about, there are several measures of heat that we can use. And there is one family of index that is the Thermal Comfort Indices, also known as bioclimatic indexes, that are used to evaluate how comfortable a person is in a given environment. And the specificity of this type of measure is that they combine weather with body response data. And this is a bunch of measures that are listed here. And we are going to focus on one of them, that is the Universal Thermal Climate Index. And this is one index that measures how the human physiology responds in the outside thermal environment. And the thermal environment here is measured by air temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and median radiant temperature. So, for example, it accounts to some extent with the heat that is radiated from the buildings, the floor, and such and alike. It also has a physiological model in the sense that it considers how fast the body responds to those thermal environment, measure as the skin temperature and the internal body temperature, and how fast someone heat ups or cool downs. It also considers a clothing model, basically as an insulation type of model. And it reduces, for example, how much insulate from this thermal environment. All of that is combined, and it provides an index that it pretends to be global, and therefore it can be used for comparative studies. And because it includes this physiological model, it's particularly useful for health studies. So, for example, how well the individuals will respond to those conditions, and how fast health condition will deteriorate. That's why we decide that it will be particularly useful for the type of studies that we want to perform in older adults that are well documented that they have a physiological condition that will deteriorate faster in heat extremes. But in addition, the UTCE has some other advantage. One is this idea that it will be global, so that we can use it for different areas of the world, or within a particular country, it will perform well for different type of regions. And the second is that in principle it's scale independent. It's an scale independent index that is, we can get a measure at the national level, at the state level, of the municipality level, and we could derive a measure that it will be equally comparable. And I'm gonna go back to this point a little bit later. Another characteristic of this type of index is that it's particularly good for tropical and subtropical contexts, like a large part of Mexico, where high temperatures and humidity are very common all year round. And the third issue that is very important is that it performs well in context with there is limited infrastructure to deal with heat. And that is particularly good in Mexico because some data suggests, or show better to say, that about 50% of the households have access to air conditioning, for example. So all of this suggests that the UTC will be very good for us in this study. We using for the study the data set for Copernicus global data set, that is the reanalysis data. And the resolution of this data is 0.5 degrees, which means that it's not very good for intra-urban studies, but it's enough for municipality studies like the one that we are performing. The data is available, data per hour, per day since 1940. It's provided for the European Data Center. And then what we use in here, as the later presentation very well explained, is that we are using average, maximum average daily. That means we average the hour data, and we provide we use the maximum UTC reach in one day. And in this map, what we are showing is the average UTC for the municipalities in 2020 during the summer. The rest of the time, we are not using only data for the summer, but for this map, we provide that information. And you can see that we actually reaching very high UTCs. This data is in Celsius, sorry, but well, that's a measure that we use in Mexico, in many other countries. And so we use Celsius here. And therefore, you can see here that quite large part of the country reach very high levels in the UTCE. It's important to say that for the UTCE, the level, the UTCE provides these thresholds, for example, that consider a strong heat stress after the 32 degrees, very strong heat 38, and extreme heat stress after the 46 degrees. And one of the things that we want to do in this presentation, that we had been doing in the last months, weeks, is the idea of to test to what extent this UTC actually works well as a global measure. And to do that, we are comparing the absolute thresholds that the UTC provides with a relative measure that is often used to identify extreme events in particularly comparing the 95 percentile with a historical reference. In this case, we're using a 15-year historical normal. So we are identifying as a heat extreme any events that is above the 95 percentile compared to the historical normal in each municipality. Versus an absolute measure that is any day that is above the measure of 32 degrees, which is the strong heat stress. In this graph, you can show that you can see the black line represent the 95 percentiles, and the color behind it, it represents the level of the UTC with the absolute values. And you can see that we have far more variability with the 95% threshold. And here we can see that there is a correlation between the maximums and minimums along the year. On the axis bar, you can see the month of the year. And so the stationality of the values, both in the absolute and the relative measure, are quite similar. But certainly the red line will suggest you that you can get far more number of municipalities getting into the extreme weather category. That is not the case in the relative measure, that is accounting for the history of heat in that each municipality. We get far less number of cases, except in one particular month, which is April. Here is a similar exploration. The yellow graph shows the absolute measure, and the blue graph shows the relative measure. And you can see that you are going to capture far more municipalities with the with the yellow graph, and it also is going to have far more days to account for the municipalities, counting as extreme heat days. And it's a very long tail that you're going to have in the case of the absolute measures. And of course, that's going to affect the exposure in this case. So for example, here we're accounting for the number of days of exposure to extreme heat events per day in each municipality. And the left side is the relative measure, and the right-hand side is the absolute measure. And of course, you are getting far more days of extreme heat with the absolute measure, just because you are lowering a little bit the threshold. So in the relative measure, the mean maximum is 34 Celsius degree, and in the absolute measure is 32. So one part is explained by that, but mainly because you get far more municipalities enter into the pocket of extreme municipalities experience extreme events. And of course, that's gonna it's gonna impact your measure person data exposure of older adults with disability. And it's not only is the amount of days that you are exposed, what you can see clearly in the categories that we're using for the maps. These are quantiles, so you can a little bit compare the two maps. But it's also the geographic pattern of this, right? You have far more variability in the geographic pattern of the relative measure, while you are getting a very clear pattern in the case of the absolute measure. I'm gonna rush to finish very soon. And this is also very clear when you look at the absolute heat measure as an excess risk rate, right? This is a Bayesian approach for that. And what we are doing here is to compare basically the local absolute exposure with the national exposure. And what you can see here is that UTC captured very well the exposure in the areas that are characterized by higher humidity rates, which is the south of Mexico and the coast. But and therefore they have higher levels of risk compared to the national. And while the municipalities in the north, which are drier, they tend to have lower values of that. Finally, our future work is focusing in 3 areas. For one, we are going to keep working on the differential of risks of people with disability by type of disability, by sex, by region, and try to explain what are those differences that we are looking and seeing in the other maps, and try to assess better what are the impacts of using one type of measure of UTCE and others. Then we are going to try to adjust the UTCE by age and sex. As I mentioned before, the UTCE has a physiological model and a clotted model, but the physiological model is thought as an average response of an individual to those environmental variables. And we want to adjust that by understanding what will be the difference in which an older adult and a kid will respond to those environmental variables. And also there are physiological variables between men and women in how they respond to those weather variables. And we are also looking at how the care need change under heat extreme for all the adults. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation. I don't see any questions for your team in the chat, but let me just double check and make sure I'm not missing any. One question I have before we close out is around the choice of UTCI. You know, it's excellent, I think, that you're using a metric that is not limited to just being associated with temperature. What are your thoughts on the use of UTCI? Do you feel that it's more applicable for outdoor temperatures than indoor temperatures? Do you think it adds value because people have used it for both outdoor and indoor temperature? Just curious to learn more about any other metrics you considered besides UTCI and why you went with UTCI.
Yes, it's better for outdoor environment precisely because it captured radiation and wind speed, which is a determinant of it works on the outside that indoors. And this is something that we are thinking in the case of Mexico, as I say, and many other less developed countries where we don't have that much heat control technology in dwellings, right? So when we are thinking about the impacts of people inside dwellings, actually, it's not cooling down, but actually could be heating up within the dwellings, right? So that, for example, the type of roof that you have, the type of walls that you have could be actually contributing to your heating up. So what we don't know exactly is how to account, what other type of adjust to do to the UTC or other type of bioclimatic index in order to account for the condition in where people are living in, so that we are actually considered to the possibility that the risk to heat is actually greater depending on the dwelling condition in the case of the less developed country. And I know there are some other indices that consider are better suited for indoor condition, but they actually are not that good in consider the physiological response. So we are switching between some models who are very good to model the weather conditions, but not the physiological response, and this one who actually combine both.
Thank you. That's a great answer. It's a very question that I've been struggling with and thinking a lot about. I know we're short on time, so we'll try to address any questions that folks drop in the chat. Let me hand it over to Lori Hunter to close us out.
Jerry, I saw your hand up for a minute. Did you want to quickly ask a question? Maybe not. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. And there are some questions in the chat that we will make sure to get to our investigators and get back to you. In the chat, you will also see some of the upcoming seminars. We have a couple that are focused on climate that'll be presented by climate scientists to help us understand climate systems and how we might integrate that kind of knowledge into our own social science model. So let me ask Jerry one more time. Did you want to ask a question? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for being here so very much. And stay tuned for more. And please do reach out if we can be of help answering any of your remaining questions. Thanks so much. Have a good day.